done now. I'm like, this thing with Victoria Beckham's done, and I'm out of here, and this health scare has made me realize I need to focus purely on this. And so that's when I went, okay, now I'm all in.
Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It'd be great to start if you could just set the scene. Where did the TouchStay journey start?
The TouchStay journey started in 2014. So yes, this would have been 11 years. We sold in our 10th year. But between that journey of starting and selling, we had many ups and downs, as most startups do. But the kickoff for the business really kind of taking off was taking a seed round, which we achieved after we'd gone through the Virgin Startup Accelerator program back in 2018, Crowd Boost. And yeah, we went through that program. It was about 7 or 8 weeks of, trying to work out how we were going to pitch ourselves and how we could write a convincing business plan and how we could value the company and all that good stuff. And eventually did a pitch evening, got our lead angel investor from that pitch evening. And then that triggered the rest of the round. And then we were able to deploy the capital and grow, and ultimately, through a lot of hard work and further rounds, selling last year. So yeah, it didn't quite all start with Virgin, but it was very early on. And that's one of the reasons really for wanting to be a part of the Virgin Community Mentor Program, was to give back in some way to the community that helped us really find our kind of kickstart, so to speak.
Awesome. So it sounds like that was an acceleration point for you. Yeah,
definitely. We already had, I would say, probably a couple of hundred customers at that stage. We'd found our product market fit, but we didn't have any capital in any sizable amount enough to kind of take advantage of that product market fit and grow. So that's essentially, that gave us that sort of launching pad to do that. So very pivotal.
And am I right in thinking you'd kind of played around in this space a little bit before, iterated with a few other ideas? And
yeah, I had a couple of businesses prior to that. I mean, my background is actually not at all in kind of startup life or really in technology, which is where TouchStay is, or in travel even. I started in fashion. In fact, I started in accountancy way back, but eventually moved into a fashion role and spent a lot of good years at businesses like Gucci and Alexander McQueen, Victoria Beckham, as sort of CFO/COO roles. And that was all amazing. But it wasn't quite what I really wanted to do. I really wanted to start on this kind of entrepreneurial journey, in particular in the tech space. But so what I did was, while I still had paid employment, I didn't jump into a startup. I started dabbling in a few things. So I started a business really, really early on called Getaway Earth, which was built around the concept of, it's like Airbnb is today, but you would start on, remember Google Earth, all those years ago? It would be like Google Earth on the front page, and you'd be able to spin it and zoom into where you wanted to go, and you'd see all the places you could.
Nice.
It was kind of like, an idea which was very hard to execute. And it was a typical marketplace. So you had to find people to put on the platform, and you had to find guests to come and book. So we kind of underestimated the size of that proposition. So we quickly folded that one. And then, I had this kind of introduction into the travel space, and particularly into the holiday rental / vacation rental space. So did start another business, but it was about writing for the vacation rental space. If you had an Airbnb description, we'd write it for you. That would be dead in the water now, because AI and ChatGPT would be able to do that for you.
Is that Insider Guides or?
It was actually called Guesthook. But Insider Guides was like a kind of a little sort of product within that. Guesthook, essentially, we wanted it to be an agency, a copy agency. And we did fairly well on that. We actually ran that for a couple of years, and the person I co-founded it with carried on with it, and then eventually sold it. So yeah, that was a good experience. But that actually led me really into TouchStay. And by that stage, I had quite a decent network within the industry. And we'll get onto a bit, I'm sure, of the community stuff. But that was one of the big communities. Getting involved in that network was really important to find then the customers and the partners that would enable us to grow. So yes, I did have a couple of other businesses prior to TouchStay.
And then was TouchStay something that evolved out of that, or was there a breakthrough moment or a spark that kind of set you towards it?
It evolved out of it in the sense that I got the bug for the industry, but the reason why it kind of really came out of that was I was a guest, and just like all of us, probably you go to a place and you don't know what's around the area, etc. But what you do have when you turn up at the cottage or the apartment or the villa or whatever is a crappy binder on the table, like page 10's missing, and there's a coffee stain on page 5, and the dog's walked off with page 6, that kind of thing. And then you open up and there's a bunch of flyers that fall out of it. It's just really like substandard for what ultimately is what I thought then, and it is true now, is the gold nuggets that were in the head of the hosts. Because as soon as the thing fell apart and I couldn't find what I wanted, I just asked the host, and they said, "Oh, well, like if you want to do this, go here." And if you want, and then they had everything up here in their head. So I was just like, "Why on earth is this not? Why haven't you put this into a digital format?" So that was the trigger for that product. And we built and we, being myself and my co-founder Joe, we built a product with zero technical knowledge. We didn't build it ourselves.
Neither of you had the technical.
We didn't have technical knowledge, and that made it very hard early stage to kind of filter out whether or not what we were being told and what was being developed was good code, bad code, efficient, using the best tools. We just didn't know. So we built something kind of quite rudimentary without that knowledge. And so what we had as the first version was okay, and it got us like a few customers, like a couple hundred customers that I mentioned, but it didn't end up being scalable enough, and it didn't look particularly beautiful. It was just almost like a concertina style. You press a button and it would go, "Here's the arrival instructions." You press a button, here's the restaurants. So it was very kind of early prototype stuff, but yeah, that's how it started.
What made you realize from that initial early prototype that there was enough in it to continue investing and growing it bigger?
Well, I think a lot of the entrepreneurial spirit is about having an intuition, and having a gut feel. And there's loads of people that would just go, "Oh, that's just BS." You really need to know like who your market is and what you're pricing it. Yeah, but you do need to have a certain conviction in what you're doing. And I always thought that there was something there, and particularly as Airbnb came along, that really helped. And then latterly, after we took the seed round and we got into deploying that capital, COVID hit really quickly, and for a couple of months we just thought, like everyone, this is the end of our business. But it wasn't. It proved to be the thing that really exploded the business, because it took something which people perceived there was COVID on, the binder, and forced them into thinking about how you do it digitally. So there were a combination of things, but I intuitively knew anyway through that rise of Airbnb and the digitization of these kind of processes that there would be a room for a tool like this. And so that's kind of what propelled us to keep pushing forward with it, and be able to convince investors that it was something to invest in. And we didn't have the perfect product then, but that didn't matter, because we were able to prove like an early stage of prototype that worked and that people bought, and then show what could come off the back of that with deploying capital. But it was really that intuition that made us like continue to try and work at it and grow it.
And what was Joe's background, and how did you meet him?
I met him when I was working at Gucci many years ago, and he came in as like a payroll assistant of all things. He came in at a really junior level, and we just struck up a really good relationship. And he was a good foil to me. Like I had I can be a bit idealistic and a bit dreamer-like of things, and he's much more like, this is how we're going to put it together. And he's like an animal when it comes to like testing things. He's not happy to say that bit of code's sort of okay, it'll do, let's send it out there. Or this feature that we've built is a decent MVP, let's send it out there. He wants to do it perfectly, and there's a certain friction there, and there always was in our relationship. It was always like push and pull with like trying to push stuff, but it was a really healthy balance. And so his background was not at all in tech or travel or whatever. We just had this happy coincidence of meeting in a former career life, getting on well together and knowing our relative strengths. It just worked.
So you've got this great idea, Touch Day, and you're working as a CFO at the same time. Talk me through the process of that transition where you sort of move out of your CFO role and into running the business.
Yeah, it happened when I was so what I decided to do was to give up fashion life and pursue Touch Day or Guest Took or something. Like it was at that point. And so I started building both. Like I had Guest Took and Touch Day running at the same time. And I got a call from an agency that said, Victoria Beckham, CFO, just left. And would you be interested in being their CFO? And I was like, nope, no, thank you. And they said, are you sure you wouldn't like just to go and meet them and see what? I was like, okay. So I went into the office and sat down with their CEO and had a chat. And while I was talking to him, Victoria herself walked into the room, and I was just like I didn't know what to do or what to say. And she went, hi, Victoria. And I was like, I know you are. So I kind of was a bit like starstruck. And eventually that meeting was like, well, do you want to just do the CFO role for 2 days a week and we'll find a CFO and you can just be like steering the ship for a while. So I thought, well, that sounds actually quite good because I've got 2 days of paid consultancy work and I've got the ability then to develop out these business ideas. Well, then just after I started, the CEO resigned. And they were literally in the middle of starting a funding process to sell a minority stake in the business. And so I didn't really kind of know what was happening, but they turned around to me and said, would you like to be the interim CEO? Because we know you, we trust you, you've been here a while and you've got the finance background. And I said, no, not really. That sounds like a too
negotiation tactic.
Yeah, I was like, no. Anyway, like as obviously it happened, and I then stayed for the best part of a year and saw the business through that positioning of like a fully owned Beckham product to now they sold a minority share of the business to private equity fund, and so that was the moment where at the end of that I thought, well, like I've actually got a really good relationship with the PE guys and I've built quite a nice relationship here internally. Maybe I could stay. And I thought back to why I wanted to leave fashion, which was to start the two businesses at the time. But really, I felt like Touch Day was the one I really needed to get stuck into. And I had a little health scare at the time as well. And I remember Joe and I still used to meet all the way through this period, like once a week, because he was working down the road. Mm-hmm. So we'd meet up in a pub every Wednesday afternoon or so, I can't remember when it was. And we'd chat and we'd think about what do we need to do with Touch Day? The one day I said to him, look, I'm done now. I'm like, this thing with Victoria Beckham's done and I'm out of here. And this health scare's made me realize I need to focus purely on this. And so that's when I went, okay, now I'm all in. I don't know if that was the answer to your original question.
It's a great answer. I love the story. I know it's amazing. And there's so many questions I could ask, but one of the things that makes me wonder is experience at such a high level as a CFO and then interim CEO, and also as a qualified accountant. What did that bring to you as an asset when you did start the business?
Yeah, I mean, it was the best thing in hindsight. I mean, way back, when I was doing my A-levels, I had no clue what I wanted to do at university, and I had no clue what I wanted to do therefore afterwards. But my dad had always pushed me down like the maths angle and the economics angle, and so that naturally led to being an accountant. And at the time, I was just like, I can't be an accountant. Like, why would I? I felt like I was selling out. What I really wanted to be was a travel journalist, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Then.
So links, yeah.
But I'm really glad I pursued, or my dad pushed me into pursuing that angle, because it just gave me all of that foundational stuff that. My one concession to myself was, though, that I would join what was then Coops & Lybrand, now PwC, in their growing business department. Mm. So I got to surround myself with very small entrepreneurial businesses. For example, I went to one of the clients and they took us out for lunch, and it happened to be they just developed a tablet for taking the orders at a table, which would send the order to the kitchen, and they would do it in the kitchen. I thought this was just like revolutionary. But it was those kind of things that made it more interesting. And so I got a lot of exposure to really small businesses and directly with either the founder or the board. And even though I was at PwC, this big organization, I was working really on very small businesses. And so I got a lot of experience in what it takes to, why does business exist, and how does it think it can get revenue, and like what's its core proposition. All of those things I was starting to already take on then. And then when I left to join Gucci, I didn't actually work for the big Gucci behemoth. I worked for a lot of the smaller brands, Alexander McQueen, etc. And they were really at their birth. Like Alexander McQueen was just starting, just being bought by the Gucci group, and I was there when we broke even, and that had a whole other aspect to it, like trying to manage debt and having a shareholder pressure on you to perform. All of that was really, really good stuff. So I wouldn't change any of that. And to answer your question, all of those things made me, when I came into entrepreneurship and starting a business, I didn't have to worry about numbers, finance, structural stuff, processes, how to pitch something, how to write a business plan. I'd done all of that stuff. The bit that I hadn't got was the coalface stuff. So, like selling and marketing. But I was able to jump into those and figure those out because I had all those other foundations already like tied up, and I knew exactly what to do. And I think that's one of the things that I see in a lot of founders at the moment that I talk to. They don't have that long experience that I've had. I'm mainly meeting younger founders, and they've got the energy and the passion for it, and that is absolutely fantastic and critical. But there's a lot of kind of knowledge gaps in there too, and that's where, as a mentor, I try to kind of fill some of that. I can't actually do the work, but I certainly know where the gap is and help them figure out how they might get around that gap, and maybe introduce them to somebody who can fill that gap. Yeah.
Did you have mentors yourself as you went from the CFO role into being a startup?
I'd never had one single business mentor, but I tapped into a few of what I, in hindsight now, would consider kind of mini mentors. People who filled certain gaps or filled certain knowledge, things that I needed to really understand. So, like early stage, we had what at the time we called a non-exec kind of board advisor. A guy called Kirby Winfield, who was in the vacation rental industry, just sold a product called Dwellable, which was like it was a kind of a new way of finding properties. It was kind of like a swipe left, swipe right, you'd see on the images, and that got bought. And I can't even remember how we got chatting. I probably just brazen, just like emailed him and said, "Hey Kirby, we need some help." And so he actually became, through this whole period, somebody who I interacted with a handful of times a year, but it was always times where I was going, I wonder what Kirby thinks of that. And I'd drop in an email or jump on a call, and he would give me that little nudge or that little piece of advice. I remember particularly when we were talking about how to price the product, and indeed what technology to use, like whether to use a native app or whether to go down a progressive web app. And he pushed us more towards the progressive web app, which I think was a fantastic idea. I'm so glad we did that. It was very, very foundational. And pricing-wise, I remember we turned up at our first conference with a booth, front of a bunch of customers, and had to start selling. Back to my earlier point about the things that I didn't have experience of. I didn't have experience of selling. And I remember tapping somebody in the industry at that time who I'd become quite good friends with, and said, like he was very gregarious and very like would just go out and sell anything. And I said, what should I do? Like, and he was like, just talk to people. just relax and just talk to people. So instead of going out there and going like, would you like to buy this? It was just like, hi, how are you? And like, tell me about your story and why you're here. And this kind of approach. And I thought it was just very, very basic, common sense, practical knowledge that like a frazzled founder who doesn't have that experience was able to tap. So these kind of early interactions, I would say, were not formal kind of mentors, but they're definitely examples of what I would call great mentoring advice.
And reaching out at moments where you feel like there's a particular skill gap or a need, and trying to find the right person to fill that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look hard enough within your network, and your network can be your family and your friends as well as your business network, there is somebody who's got something to say about that particular problem that you've got. And I'm lucky enough to have had all these years where I've had such a diverse career, and I've got a lot of people who I know are very skilled at certain things, and who I've given to along the way as well. I think that's the important thing. Sometimes I think it's a danger to assume that you can just go to someone and say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Because it's, the process is definitely a two-way street. And I think that's one of the things to think about too, is is not always about taking, it's about giving to as well where you can. I'm a strong believer in things having like a circular, well, hence me being here. Yeah, it's definitely something that I found in my network. I could always tap somebody to answer your question about, like, if there was this skill shortage I had, I knew there was somebody that I could go to and ask that.
And from a emotional journey as a founder, did you have a peer group of other founders you could lean upon, or how did you build a sort of community around that?
Yeah, I mean, I had the Virgin group, which there were, I think, 8 of us on that cohort, and we had a Slack group together, and it gradually dwindled away. But certainly in that accelerator program, there was lots of like, how are you doing this, and what do you think, and you take interest in each other's businesses and have a perspective on each other's businesses, which was helpful. But as soon as we stepped away from that, I felt very much sort of alone again. But I through my network, I was on fairly good terms with a lady who'd run a business called Gather Content, which was an online, it was a SaaS tool, and I admired the way she ran the business, and they were a decent ARR, and so I always kept in touch with her, and I met her last week actually. She sold her business, but we still kept in touch, and I think that's the important thing. You've got to sort of always nurture and develop these relationships, but she was somebody who I could turn to if I wanted just that, that viewpoint of a founder who may have struggled with something. But also I found it within our industry, there were a lot of burgeoning like new tech businesses in the Airbnb space. I mean, Airbnb is just one, part of the tech ecosystem, that it just spawned a whole range of other TouchStay-like products, all doing slightly different things. And sometimes we were competitive or semi-competitive. Sometimes we weren't. But even with the competitive ones, I found that those were the ones that I developed some of the strongest relationships with, because we all knew that a rising tide was going to float all of our boats, and that we were all struggling with some kind of similar things. And of course, we would never say, well, what bit of code are you writing here and how have you done that? But we would certainly, meet at conferences and say, how's it going? And are you struggling here? And how are you finding this? And how was that conference? Should I go to that one? All of that kind of knowledge sharing was really, really important. So I would say that it's, yes, partly the Virgin Startup Accelerator group, partly my own sort of network of founders outside of the industry, and then very much inside the industry, I found people that were peers and not always competitive peers.
Did that help you to overcome the skill gap from a technical point of view, or was that about hiring other people in that could help with that?
No, we had to hire people in. We I won't go into the full story, but we originally developed the first iteration of the product in the States, because I spent time in the States at Gucci, and we iterated it then. And when I moved back, we decided we really had to have like a developer in the UK. And the one in the States, it was like a small developer, and he'd just left the business, and we had no idea what our code base was, or like how, we were just stuck. And we found a very, very boutique Python developing agency near Brighton. And they stepped in and were just epic, and they've been with us ever since. But they were great at kind of almost being like a CTO, which we didn't have, which was like, what have you got here and how does it look? And this is what we need to do with it. But they, I'm sure they won't mind me saying, they were expensive relative to our means. So we eventually had to hire our own developer, but we didn't know how to do that. So we asked them, and they put us in touch with the Ukrainian agency who we have worked with ever since. And they were the ones that brought us our development team. So yeah, it's about kind of just figuring stuff out, and just like a lot of entrepreneurial stuff is about, I don't know how to fix this problem, but I'm going to start asking 25 people and somebody somewhere will have the answer, and I'll have a good gut feel about whether they're worth it or not.
Was there a moment where you felt like you'd really started to get traction and you knew you had found that product market fit, and you could look forward, hopefully that it was going to work out as expected?
Oh yeah, definitely. We after attending a few conferences and being told that the product wouldn't scale for certain types of businesses, we went not back to the drawing board, but we developed some new code, iterated the product, came back to the market, because we knew at that stage it wasn't that the product wasn't required, it was just the way we'd done it wasn't going to work at scale. So once we'd done that, we knew there was product market fit. And then, so then we were able to take what did we raise back in April 2019, like a couple 100,000. And we were able to say, okay, now we need to put that to another developer, a marketing person, and have some runway, and also dabble in a few things. Like the money wasn't, all for specific things. Even that's one thing I would say, having spoken to some founders about wanting capital. It's one of the two most asked questions of me is, how do I raise money and how do I find more people to buy my product? And the raising money thing's always interesting because I always try to ask the question back, like, what is it you want your business to be in 3 to 5 years? Because that determines how much you want to raise now. It's in my opinion, a little bit, not always foolish, but to try and raise too much at an early stage at a valuation that you maybe have to keep chasing and then raise more. And I'd much rather try and, like we did, raise a couple $100,000 for a certain set of key things. And it's really important to identify what those things are, but still have a little bit of play money, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
One of our investors said, I don't mind if you want to throw some of this at the wall and see what sticks. So you do need to have a little bit of that because you're entrepreneurs, so you're figuring stuff out. It's not always going to work. But yeah, we knew there was strong product market fit and we were able to use that capital to do that.
And then how did the exit or the sale come along in the end?
I had a stroke in 2022. I ran the London Marathon and finished the London Marathon and was like high-fiving and whooping with everyone else, and then felt kind of awfully weird. And long story short, I had a stroke. I was fine, and as you can see, I'm perfectly able. And I was one of the lucky ones who it didn't have too much of an impact on. But it was one of those kind of like real sort of turning points for me. What was the question? Sorry.
What led to the exit?
What led to the exit? Yeah, so that was it. So that was the trigger for me to say, we've built a really nice business. Do I want to spend another 5 years scale? We were still growing 60% year on year, so we were still like, and obviously if you've got a SaaS product and you keep on growing at that pace, you just wait until tomorrow to sell it, until it slows a bit, like then it's a bit harder to sell. But so I knew that there was legs in it, we could carry on, but I also knew that this stroke had created a friction, much the same way as having a mini health scare at the end of Victoria Beckham had led me to wanting to focus on touch day. It was now something just intuitively I knew it was kind of the right moment. Joe was less so. Joe was a bit like, we had a little bit of, do we want to sell? Do we not want to sell? And I was like, I want to sell. He was like, I don't want to sell. We figured out kind of the right value to go to the market. And we just thought, we'll just seed this in the market and see, like who's interested. And then as soon as you get an offer on the table, everything changes. You're then like, okay, now we actually would quite like to sell. Like there's money like black and white there for us. So, I know that we gave up on some value, but I also know that it enabled me to stop that kind of, I need to stay on another year to try and grow. I knew that the exit value was sufficient for me to be able to have a good life and to be able to then put my time back into something which I considered more meaningful, which I still don't know the answer, I've got to say. But part of that is about helping other founders. And part of it may be starting another business in some other way that doesn't have the stress of growing or the stress of growth and doesn't take capital because I fund it myself, or I don't know what that next thing will be. But that was the catalyst for that. And I would say along that journey as well of selling, it's probably, this part is probably a little bit beyond what most people who are listening to this podcast are thinking about, because I should imagine most people are thinking about like, how do I grow and how do I start and how do I build? But it's always worth keeping in mind what value would be a good value for you to exit, because it does inform, one, what I said earlier about how much capital you raise now and the extent to which you go large or are happy to deploy small amounts, but also the decisions you take along the way. And also particularly who you hire and if you hire that person, what their role is and how embedded they are in the company based on your knowledge of when you want to sell. It's very nuanced. But I had a lot of discussion with another mentor that was a friend of mine. So he was a university friend, and he's one of my best friends. And we meet each other for drinks, and we go away weekends and all this kind of stuff. And I never really thought of him as somebody who'd be like a business mentor. He was just a good mate. But he was really instrumental in helping me figure out through that sale process whether I really wanted to sell or not. Like I had immense amount of angst about whether I really had tears. There was pain, there was angst, there was like, I'm going to sell, there was happiness. And he got me to really think about why I'm doing it and distill the important things. And it was because he knew me. And I think that's one of the other important things about mentorship. It's not always people who are in a business context, but it can be somebody who knows you. And when they know you, they can ask those right questions about what you really want out of a business or a sale. And he helped me really kind of put together in my mind why it was I was selling, which ultimately led me to pick up the pen and sign the LOI and get on with it.
Nice. And I guess having someone who has your best interests at heart and not just the business, someone you can lean upon who cares about you as a person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think business mentors can obviously often be about sort of helping the founder and the founder as a founder, not the founder as a person. And I think that founder as a person is really, really important. It's something that's probably, not considered as much as it should be, because we all have a family, we all have rent or a mortgage, or we all have aspirations, and those are the sort of things that when you close the laptop at the end of the day and you go back to wherever you live, those are the things that still stress you. They're still the things that keep you up at night. So having somebody that knows you is, I think it's really, it's something that I think as a type of mentorship is really overlooked and undervalued. I think it's really important.
And I know, having left the day-to-day of my business, the sort of mixed feelings you can have around it, and you've fully exited. So how does that feel for you now as a founder?
I've made my peace with it now. Yeah, it was a year this week that the transaction completed, and I stayed on 6 months just as we had no earn out. That was one of our criteria, was we wanted an all cash deal. We didn't want any performance-based earn-out. So after 6 months, I was technically done, but I stayed on for a couple of months and did some sort of advisory consulting stuff for them. But before that, like long before that process of when someone comes and puts an offer in front of you, that's, as you know, that's wow, that's the high point. The reality then is, I mean, it depends what sort of person you are, but me being me, I'm quite intense about things and I think very carefully about things. And that soon became from, wow, there's an offer on the table, to, crap, that's the business I built. That's my baby. I thought of it like that.
Well, I've heard having a startup activates the same part of your brain as having a child. So a sense of attachment's quite deep.
Well, I get that. I mean, probably not as, if I think about my own kids, are probably not that deep, but I understand completely what you're saying. Like there's a certain, it's weird. Like at the end of the day, it's a limited company. It's got a logo. It's got shares, and it's a product. It's got nothing like of emotional, like it doesn't talk or speak, but it becomes your baby, and it becomes your identity as well. I think that's one of the other things that it's very, for 10 years it was very much, for me, this was the business that I had built and was selling, but also in the industry it was always, Andy's the one who runs TouchStay, so it's an identity thing, and once you lose a bit of that, once you lose that completely, it is a tough decision to sell it, but it's ultimately the right one. You get over it. I did.
How have you found peace? Sorry, I'm going to start again. How have you found peace with it?
Just time, really, and talking to people. And I think also going through that process, those first few weeks were really hard because you've got a new owner, you're no longer responsible. So all those decisions you would just take, somebody else is, they're not quite taking them yet because it's too early, but they're asking you and they're probing you. And they want to do things differently, and they see that process over there and they want to change that. And then they're technical, they're SaaS buyers, so they're very technical. So they're looking at the product and the way the product's marketed, and this is how they would do it. And we're like, but this is what we used to invest in. This is how, so it's very some of that. But I'm always a person that tries to find a common ground to work with someone, and they were great buyers too. And then we found that common way of working, and that kind of difficulty of how does the new relationship form, and what does it look like with my baby being in someone else's house. I got past that bit pretty quickly, and then it was the team. So then some of the team were not enjoying life so much because we'd built a business which was very family oriented. It was very touchy-feely. We had a really, really open dialogue with people. People were just really passionate about being there. And
you won like a Team of the Year award or something the year you...
Yeah. We won Team of the Year just literally the month before we were selling. And it was weird because I knew we were very close to selling and all the team didn't, because we didn't tell the team till the end. And so I was like, yeah, we're Team of the Year. I was like, shit. But that team is part of the product. That team continues. But it's difficult when that team then comes with a new owner who wants to do things in a slightly different way, and there's a challenge on things, and it's no longer this lovely family sort of business. And I don't want to make it sound like we were just like, like we'll grow if we want to. My background was very much like, this is what we need to do. And these are our growth targets and we're going to grow and we want to sell. But we did it in a very informal, friendly way. And most of our investment decisions, we took punts on. Like, we knew kind of intuitively that something would work, so we would do it. Whereas the new buyers were very analytical about things. And so that creates a bit of within the team. And so that bit I never really made peace with. I always found, but that was just an inevitability of selling. Like, you have to accept that someone else is going to come in and do things differently. Tough as that is, that's part of what happens when you sell the business. But having got through that, and eventually I saw, them adding to the team, and then they promoted one person in the team, and I then felt like the business was in like good and safe hands, and then I started to feel like a bit of a spare part, kind of more. And that's when I said, like, I think my time here is done, and I'll move on. So it was a gradual process.
And looking forward now, I know that you're doing some mentoring for Virgin Startup, and you talked potentially about a business, but I think I heard you say not tech again. So what's the future for you in terms of business and mentoring?
Well, mentoring I will still do, and I actually get a lot of energy from that, because it's great to listen to people who come and say, I've got this idea, and it's like, wow, but I'm stuck with this, some of the earlier things we were talking about. So I'll definitely keep on doing that, but I'm not in a hurry to do anything else. Like, one of the things that I have always done in the past is jump to progression and jump into new and interesting things. A, for that progression personally and professionally, but B, also because I wanted ultimately to have a bigger house, and I wanted ultimately to be able to travel, and I wanted, so that fuels things as well. And I don't have that pressure so much anymore, that self-inflicted pressure. So I'm taking my time about what new business to do. But I've had a really, really strong relationship with the guy that took over from me from the acquirers company, and he's a very, very wise head, and he's been in technology before and knows how to manage teams, and therefore he's quite emotionally smart. And he and I have spoken a lot, and he said, you know what, Andy, probably what you want to end up doing is having a business, a for-profit business that also has this kind of altruistic angle too, and combining the two. So there might be something. I got a couple of ideas. Yeah. So we'll see where we go.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, delighted. And I'm sure many of the Virgin Startup founders will be excited to see you on the platform as a potential mentor.
Hopefully.